welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Our question for today is, how do we begin to work with Mother Nature instead of against her? I'm excited to have as my guest a woman who embodies that sentiment, who walks her talk, Kristen Krash. You may remember she was featured in Best in Climate on episode 139 with her powerful writing, Rewild, Regenerate, or Reforest, a call to action. She is the co-founder of the Sueno, correct me if that's really bad, Sueno de Vida Regenerative Living Project, which looks like a veritable Garden of Eden in Ecuador.
Thank you.
Welcome, Kristen.
Hi.
So glad to have you here.
Cool. Yeah, me too. Glad to make it.
How long have you been down there? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, so we've been here for almost 5 years now. We came from Washington, D.C., and I met Juan in Washington, D.C. About 7 years ago. And when I met Juan, he was from Ecuador. I was at a place in my life where I've been teaching yoga for about 20 years. And I loved teaching yoga for a really long time, but I taught 14,000 classes. And I don't think any human being should ever do anything 14,000 times.
Yow.
Still be okay with it. I was kind of a little burned out on the teaching yoga thing. I was thinking about leaving the United States. It was very serious. It wasn't like I was just, I'm going to think about it. I mean, I was looking for ways that I could leave the United States because my income was staying pretty horizontal and the cost of living was just skyrocketing. And I just felt like I was going from treading water to drowning. So I was thinking I could teach a lot less yoga in another country and probably live better if I adjusted where the cost of living was lower. And then I meet Juan. Juan tells me, originally he had that the guy thing where it's like, well, I don't know if I can have a serious relationship, even though I really like you, that kind of stuff, because I want to go back to my country of Ecuador. I want to be with my family and I want to go back to my country. And I was like, okay, me too, let's go. So I kind of signed myself up to come back to Ecuador with Juan. So we started thinking about what we would do here. Initially, the idea was a lot more kind of middle of the road, a little bit more, I don't know what I'm just going to call half-assed. It was kind of like, okay, well, I can teach yoga. Juan was doing some contracting work with a company that builds houses. So Juan knows how to build stuff and I can teach yoga. Maybe we could have this little ecotourism place and I can teach yoga classes. Juan can build it. We both like to cook. It was just sort of more in the hospitality vein. We weren't really thinking all this about sustainable living. And we were kind of going along like that, but it felt really half-baked to me. It didn't feel like that was the whole reason to make a big change.
So is this when you did crowdfunding or an Indiegogo or something to get that up and running?
We did, but we came up with the idea to do the sustainable living thing first.
Okay.
I mean, obviously we had to have a little bit more. If I'm going to crowdfund, we want to have a reason for people to donate money. So Juan was watching a lot of reality shows about off-grid living. I got into them too. People are like, how'd you get this idea? I'm like, well, we watch TV. I mean, seriously, we were watching Live Free or Die, Alaska, the Last Frontier, the Bush People of Alaska. We found all these reality shows about people living off the grid. And we were like, this really speaks to us. This is much more of what we would want to do. We came up with this idea of having a sustainable living center to educate people. And I was always into urban gardening, as so was Juan. But the funny thing about it is that we really had no idea what it was to live sustainably in a cloud forest, in a jungle, in subtropical area, in a developing country. I mean,
and why would you think you would?
Yeah, I don't know. So, I've been kind of like faking it till I make it my whole life. So it felt okay, I guess. I don't know.
I think most of us have.
So I said, okay, we're going to go with this. We created a website and came up with a vision and a mission and all these things. We had it really well presented. I had a really strong, loyal following of yoga students too that really just wanted me to succeed at whatever it was that I was moving on to do. And they all donated quite a bit of money. So, I mean, not like a ton. I mean, we're not Bill Gates. So we came down here with about $10,000. Which goes a long way in Ecuador, but isn't going to last forever. We did our crowdfunding. We came down and we were fortunate enough to be able to stay with Juan's family in Quito for about 8 months while we were driving around looking for a plot of land that we could afford. So we found a plot of land that seemed pretty amenable to an off-grid project. There was no water. There was no electricity. There was water. There's a spring. We're very fortunate to have a spring. And I just want to say very quickly, one of the reasons why off-grid projects get abandoned most of the time is because people don't realize if they don't have a water source, what their lives are going to be like. So we have a freshwater spring and we have a lot of rain. And we had a tent. We had a big tent, our 2 dogs, some tools. We just camped out and got started.
How big is your plot?
Our plot is 3 hectares.
What's a hectare as opposed to an acre?
We have 9 acres. Yeah,
Okay.
A hectare is a little bit less than 3 acres.
Okay. That's a pretty good size, actually.
It is a pretty good size, but we're in like huge farmlands country where there's huge monoculture crops of heart of palm and cacao and bananas. So our plot is relatively small to a lot of our neighbors. But since we've been here, fortunately, our project has attracted quite a bit of interest from investors back in Canada and in the United States. And so we've managed to broker sales on behalf of the owners to some of these lots for other people. They bought them and we were very active in helping them with all the paperwork and everything. And now we're basically developing their land for them permaculture style. So if you include all the lands that we are also managing, we have 15 hectares, which is over 40 acres.
Wow, that's a lot.
We're very busy now, but in the first 2 years, it was just us on our 3-hectare plot, our little 9-acre plot, just trying to survive and get it started.
So you bought this plot, and what was the land like? It was pretty denigrated, correct?
It had been used to pasture cattle for about 25 years. It's a common thing that happens here in these subtropical countries where a logging company will acquire a big piece of land and then they will denude it. They'll come in and they'll cut down all the trees. They'll cut down the trees for rubber, latex, timber, other things. And then once the land has just been deforested, it will be sold off at auction, usually to the team that has cut down the land very cheaply. The person that we bought the land from was actually one of the original lumberjacks that had helped to cut down the trees on the land. And then once the land is deforested, the easiest thing for people to do if they can't afford what they think needs to be expensive agriculture with all the chemical inputs and tractoring and fertilizers and everything, is they sow grass seed. They sow a lot of African and European strains of grass like rye and wild rices, and then they just put cattle on the land and then the cattle can graze. Now, I want to be very careful about what I'm saying because grazing cattle on land doesn't always have to be degenerative. And I think that that's something that people that are really into agroforestry and reforestation in general can sometimes get a very negative view of grazers being on land, that it's always a regenerative thing. And grazing can actually be done in rotational ways that actually can help the ecosystem. It doesn't have to be degrading, but in our case, it definitely was.
I'll have to look that up and include a link on this podcast, but there is a man who that's his whole premise, bringing cattle and grazing on this plot for so long and letting them poop, do their thing, and their hoofs push down the manure into the soil and, and then they move to another place and then they move on. That's a whole theory about how you bring back the land.
It is. The problem with it here is, I like to say, like, in general, everything is specific. That's like one of my favorite. I read that somewhere. I don't remember where I read it, but it's so catchy. It's like, in general, everything is specific, right? Definitely when you're talking about biospheres and ecosystems, in general, everything is specific. The problem with grazers on subtropical forest land is that we're basically in a rainforest. We're in a rainforest at a little bit of a higher elevation, so it's called a cloud forest, but it's basically a rainforest. And when you deforest a rainforest, you take away, like I talked about a lot in my article that you read, Regenerate Wild Forest, you take away the canopy of trees that protects the soil from the really heavy gravitational fall of rain. So the rain here is, I mean, it's serious. It's like you don't want to be out in it. It will knock you down.
So it erodes the soil.
It erodes the soil. Yeah. And then you just end up with this big sort of muddy slurry of topsoil just constantly leaching off and washing into rivers and eventually ending up in the ocean. And all the nutrients go out with it. Forestation in like subtropical rainforest areas is much, the ecosystem here is more, it's very robust ecosystem in some ways, but in some ways it's also very fragile. And if you take away the canopy, that is one of the most paramount species of the rainforest is the trees that make up the canopy. And those are called keystone species. And when you take away the keystone species, it has a super fast moving and rapid and detrimental effect on the whole rest of the ecosystem. So taking away the canopy here and also taking away the lattice of roots that are connected to the bottom of those trees that are also holding
the soil in place. Yeah.
Exactly. So you got that double whammy.
Yeah, I can picture that. So you get to your plot of land and you pitch your tent and whatever, and then you like, so where do you start?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question because now I talk about it like I'm such an expert about, starting with pioneer species, fast growing plants like yucca and bananas. But at the time I didn't know any of this. I was really in the dark and I didn't really understand that if you just start planting the trees that you like on degraded land, I'm going to grow mangoes and avocados and coconuts because those are awesome, and you start sticking those saplings in the ground, they really suffer. But we did that in the beginning. We didn't know any better. And so we planted about 50 to 60 saplings to start of our favorite fruits. And then we just watched the trees. We didn't really lose very many, to be honest. Maybe we lost like 3 or 4, but just kind of watching them be stunted and suffering and wilting. And it was horrible because I felt like responsible for them. I put them in the ground and they weren't doing all that great. The ground was very hard. It had been compacted by the rainfall. It was lacking a lot of nutrients and just really not understanding that. And then also like we had to build a house. And we had to figure out how to harvest rainwater. We had to get a pump to pump water up from the spring and the dry season. So we had a whole lot to do just to basically meet our basic necessities without even worrying about an agroforestry project. So we were very, very busy. In the meantime, I just started doing research. Okay, like permaculture in the tropics, what's that like? I was very fortunate to find a series of very old blog posts, very obscure, that probably hardly anybody else read. But they were by a man named Christopher Nesbitt, very knowledgeable fellow who has a center in Belize called the Maya Mountain Research Farm. And his blog posts were great because he had started on a degraded cattle pasture in Belize, also in a subtropical rainforest, just like we had. He started way back in the 80s. He had figured out how to regenerate it from scratch by himself and documented some of it. So I started following what he said in his posts, and that was super helpful. So that was where I learned about like planting pioneers, bananas, fast growing things that will help you build what permaculturists like I love the permaculture people. I mean, they're awesome, but I think like they have a downfall, and that's where they want to get everybody on board with permaculture really fast. So they make it seem really easy. Oh, just like do this thing where you chop and drop mulch from existing trees. Well, like what if you don't have any? Like what if there's no trees on, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
They don't really cover that because I think they just want to like get you on board, and they show like we're in this mature, awesome forest and we're chopping and dropping with our machetes and everything is just growing and the soil is regenerating and it's so awesome. But like they don't take you all the way back to the beginning of, and that was what was great about this Christopher Nesbitt and his blog was that I was able to see and read about somebody that went back to the beginning.
So you're almost 5 years into it. Why cacao?
Cacao is a very good thing to grow for many reasons, because if you grow the right kind of cacao, it has a very high commercial value. So economically speaking, it's a very good thing to grow. But the best thing about cacao is that the high grade varieties of cacao, like the one we have here in Ecuador, is called Arriba or Roma Nacional. It's one of the most in-demand cacaos in the world to produce fine chocolate, thrives in partial shade. It doesn't need full sun. It doesn't need to be planted in rows. It's actually a forest dwelling tree. And the size of the tree determines where it's in, like a real food forest, like a natural food forest. So if you have an upper canopy, that would be maybe trees for timber, green fodder, some fruit like lychee. Achotillo is a really good upper canopy tree. Nut trees like Brazil trees. And then underneath you have the middle canopy. The lower trees, they're not quite dwarf trees, but they're like mid-height trees, anywhere from maybe 20 to 25 feet in that area. They grow under the upper canopy, so they are natural to requiring a partial shade environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dappled shade. So when you look up and you see the sunlight flickering through the upper canopy, and you get that really pretty picture of the sunlight flickering down through the green upper canopy, the trees that are underneath are adapted to growing in that dappled shade. And cacao is one of them.
Nice.
So cacao thrives in an agroforestry environment. You can have your upper canopy and you can have cacao. Yeah.
So is cacao your main product?
It is we grow a lot of other things just for our own subsistence to enjoy. We also grow a lot of green plantains. Green plantains are a staple food here in South America. You know, a plantain is like a big banana, but you eat it starchy instead of sweet. We grow a lot of those because we use them as the pioneer species. So if you've ever seen a banana tree, a plantain tree is exactly the same. They grow very tall, very fast. They're not really a tree. It's just a big watery stem with great big leaves, and then eventually you get the fruit. They only produce once. Banana is actually a plant. Let's just not even call it a tree. It's actually
so it only produces once, but that is that part of the canopy? Does that become part of the canopy?
It's a temporary canopy. So when you have a degraded land, you need to set up like a temporary canopy, because your permanent upper canopy trees, like your Brazil nuts and your lychee and your jackfruit, your mango, your coconut, they take much longer to grow. A banana tree reaches full height in 10 months.
But then you pick it and then it dies back and then you have to replant it.
No, banana trees self-propagate like bamboo.
Okay.
So they spread out at the bottom.
They send runners.
They send up runners. Exactly.
Okay.
So you never need to replant. And in the meantime, in the shade of your banana tree, you plant your permanent agroforestry system in the shade of those initial pioneers.
Wow. It sounds incredible.
It's a great system. And the thing about the system that's so great is that if you don't have a ton of money to get something started and you need to eat in the meantime, there are these pioneer plants you can grow. Also yucca, which is like a great big potato that grows underground, is a great pioneer. There's things you can grow in the meantime that give you a yield in under a year that you can sell or eat. You can survive while you're growing your permanent food forestry system. And for people like Juan and I who came down here, I mean, we were only 40. We didn't have any retirement. We really went out on a limb. We just really went for it. That's really important to us. So when people talk about, but what about subsistence level farmers? What will they do in the meantime? Well, I can actually talk about that because I am a subsistence level farmer in some ways. Didn't have a big bank account to back me up. So it's like, okay, we want to grow this agroforestry system with cacao, but they take 3 to 5 years to produce the cocoa bean. So what are we going to do in the meantime?
So what would you say to the average Joe or Jane? I mean, obviously there are not many of us that are going to be as brave to do what you have done, but there are many of us that have small plots of land. Obviously, you probably know that 2% of the land in the United States is lawn. I mean, it's the biggest waste of.
Yeah, it's like Italy or something, or Greece.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, and people spend their free time riding around on gas-powered mowers and feeding it pesticides and herbicides and all that kind of stuff. So there is a movement for people to walk away from that, and I think it's a small movement. I think it's viable.
Right.
So what would you say to people that are like, they don't want to live the pesticide existence that they've been living?
Right.
How can you extrapolate what you've been doing? And where would you start if you lived in someplace rural, you had some land, but you wanted to make it more in balance with nature as opposed to trying to dominate nature?
Right. Well, it's great that you asked me this because actually I can really talk about this in a knowledgeable way because I did live in urban situations. The thing about permaculture is it's not really a thing. Like permaculture just means permanent agriculture. It just means that you're setting up a system that has an ability to sustain itself without you always being hovering over it, picking weeds and picking, yellow leaves off of plants. So people have like an overblown idea like permaculture is like this big deal, and it's really not. It's permaculture. There's a series of techniques that fit into permaculture, and it can always be scaled to any scale. So like I talk about jackfruit trees and banana plants and cacao, whereas somebody with like a small, even if they just have a backyard that they want to convert from a lawn to something that produces food and houses pollinators and has beneficial wildlife in there, they could grow perennial sunflowers, upper canopy. Do you understand?
Okay. Yep.
And they could grow squash as their vining plants. And they could grow thyme and oregano and basil and leafy greens as their ground cover plants. And they could grow hedges of rosemary and lavender that would help to keep out weeds, or if they want to have a border between their lawn and their garden space, you could grow natural hedges that could do that for you. And when I say could, I mean, I actually did this. I've done urban scale permaculture.
So you were in DC, so it was cold there in the winter. So this stuff survives in the winter.
The best thing to do is like find out about all your perennial plants. They don't live all winter, obviously, but they go dormant, and then they come back in the spring.
Okay.
And usually some of the first things to come back in the spring will be your perennial plants. And there's tons of edible perennials, sorrel, King Henry, which is very much like spinach. You just have to search them out and then plant a lot of perennials. And in the meantime, lavender is a perennial, rosemary, oregano, thyme, green onions, chives. These are all perennial. So they will all come back every year to create an ecosystem that's balanced between your perennials. And then once you have your perennials established, it's so much easier to grow lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and those other things, because perennials, just like pioneers here in the forest, they have big tap roots. They open up the soil for you. They attract beneficial predator insects that are going to keep the pests in control. It can all be scaled, is what I'm saying. And I've actually started on that scale and then upscaled to the forest and had to learn how to do it on a large scale. But when I think about like the small scale of it, I was actually really good at it. I mean, I grew amazing amounts of food. I'm talking a little eighth of an acre backyard. And, for people that have a little bit more land, if they're in semi-rural areas or out in suburbs and they've got that full acre, it's the same thing. But perhaps their canopy, instead of being perennial sunflowers, might be dwarf pear trees. The mid-level tree in a mature forest can be your upper canopy on your 1 acre suburban lot. So it's all about scaling things to the size that you have, finding the trees and the perennials that will thrive in your particular zone 1, or not zone 1, of course, that's like the North Pole, but zone 4 or zone 5 or zone 6 or wherever you are, scaling everything to your system. I actually am teaching a course on this.
Last year, because of COVID, I converted my front lawn into a vegetable garden. I've always done flowers, bulbs, that kind of stuff. I needed a project, obviously, because I was going to go.
You and millions of other people.
And I think gardening went crazy last year, right?
COVID thing. Yeah.
But the good thing about it was like, so it's all an experiment. You're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and what does work you want to expand, and what doesn't work you just don't repeat, or you move it someplace else and try it someplace else or whatever. So it's amazing how sustainable we can be, how much food we can grow ourselves, how much better it tastes.
Yeah.
When it's not trucked across the country or whatever. I mean, I can't grow avocados in Massachusetts, but the tomatoes and the cukes and the squash and the eggplant and all that stuff and all the fresh herbs. I mean, to be able to go out to my garden at night and go, okay, what do I feel like eating tonight?
Exactly.
Was incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said also for eating a lot more local and regional food. I don't think New Yorkers need to be eating papaya salad in February. And maybe it sounds easy for me to say that, but like I love apples and pears, and I don't eat apples and pears anymore because they don't grow in my climate. By the time they get sent here from the mountains of Chile, they're just horrible.
I think we've gotten really spoiled. I mean, I was discussing this actually with my childhood friend last night. We've known each other since we were 13 and we're both in our 60s. And it was like what we had was apples and pears. That's what we had in the winter here. And it's because they were, cold weather crops and you could put them in the root cellar or whatever. And then you could, we didn't have grapes and we didn't have avocado and papaya and mango and all that stuff.
It was in preserve.
But now you go into a grocery store and it's all imported from someplace else. It's picked when it's not ripe. It's all the transportation system. I just don't know how sustainable that is anymore. I have to really look at that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole distribution chain, how much fossil fuel the distribution chain requires. To keep it running, you know what I mean? All of the international shipping regulations that have to exist because of it. And also just loses 70% of its nutrients in transit because vitamin C, water soluble, most B vitamins, water soluble. So as the fruit is on the truck evaporating out moisture, all your water soluble vitamins are going out with it.
You think about the amount of waste for the food that's actually picked. And then by the time it's transported, and then if it gets to the grocery store and it's not perfect looking, then it's kind of tossed and then it gets brought into people's houses and you fill your refrigerator and you might not even really eat all the stuff that's in it.
You're not composting. So it's just like,
I think the statistics are like 40% of all food that's grown is wasted.
It's wasted.
And then we have so many people that don't have food. So
and the vast majority of it is out in the developed world too.
The whole distribution system is out of whack.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that we've lost a lot of the ability to know what it is to treat ourselves to something. I'm not out to deprive people in Chicago of pineapple. I mean, it's really not my job to tell people what they should and shouldn't eat because it's not, sustainable. I mean, everybody's got their own path. But know when you're eating something that is, that maybe it's a special treat. It's not something that, I'm just going to go and spend $8 on tropical fruit in the winter in Wisconsin. I look at the Scandinavian cultures and in Russia and in Poland, and my grandmother was Polish, and all of the ways that they would preserve things because they have very short but very intense growing seasons, kind of like you do up in Massachusetts. You've got a short but intense summer, same thing.
I can't possibly eat everything that I grow. I mean, I was giving away stuff like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, even still,
the sauerkraut, the jams and the jellies and the fruit compotes and their level of the flavor that you could get from things that have been kept in jars. I even preserve food here on the farm because I just love the way it tastes. And sometimes we'll get like a great big basket of fruit from a neighboring farm. And I'm like, well, we can't eat all this at once. So I'll make a vinegar out of it, or I'll make a wine out of it. I'll make a jam. And it's just such a great skill to have, is to know how to pickle and preserve things. It's a ton of fun. Kids are home from school. They're all like learning on Zoom or whatever. Get them involved in the kitchen. Have them like pickling and preserving fruits and veggies. It doesn't even have to be stuff you grow. But you can go to the farmer's market, and if you go late to the farmer's market, it's a great time to go because they're always trying to like get rid of stuff, rock bottom price. Go to the farmer's market at the last minute and like get everything like really cheap. They've got that like big barrel of apples, and they're just like, a barrel of apples, like $4. Take it home, cider it, make apple butter. I mean, all of these solutions are within reach. We have to do it.
It seems like those kinds of life skills, we've kind of lost them, but we've also undervalued them. The people that know how to do those kinds of things, we've undervalued who they are. I think we've really seen with the whole border wall, the number of immigrants that were not coming in. I winter in California because my sons live out there, and people weren't coming up from Mexico every day. I mean, I'm in San Diego, so people were not coming every day. And what that meant was there were fruits and vegetables in the fields that were just lying fallow, that were not being picked because the people that say, well, they're taking our jobs. Well, really, white men don't want to be in the fields picking. They don't want to be doing that stuff.
They're really inept at it too. So,
well, these people they're willing to work really hard and they work really fast, and they're happy to have that job. They weren't able to be there, so we lost so much of that food just rotted, and it was criminal.
Right.
So somehow we need to get back to valuing people that are the frontline workers. I mean, the people that kept us going.
Right. I mean, it's true. I mean, and I don't want to make it seem like, because sometimes it can come across as a little like prosaic, where it's like, I'm going to save the world by waving my jar of pickles at the melting ice cap. Like, that's not going to happen. I mean, we need big collective, scalable solutions. You know what I mean?
Systemic solutions. Yeah.
Systemic solutions, but we also need to acknowledge that we are the system. There's nothing but a bunch of individuals.
We can all be doing
A
something.
lot. Yeah, I would say more than something. I would even say a lot. One of the most successful political campaigns ever was the WPA. Back in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration during the Depression, where it was just like, okay, Americans don't have jobs. They have nothing to do. How many trees were planted? How many public parks were cleaned up? How much
infrastructure was built, right? Yeah.
And now we have this whole population of millennials drowning in student debt, and they can't get good jobs. Like, bring back a WPA for these people. Like,
put people to work and give them dignity. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. So I think that the big systemic changes will come a lot from individual actions, but they also have to come from individuals like getting on board with doing these bigger things, like going to work in like some sort of public administration, cleaning up a park, cleaning up a riverbed.
So how do we come to visit you? What does that look like? Are you having people come as tourists, or do they come
and
intern on your farm, or how does that work?
There's a page on our website that says Visit the Farm. It's right up there in the top navigation, very easy to find. So SDV Forest and then Visit the Farm. And there's details there about the accommodations, the different programs to apprentice with us. We have a specific apprenticeship program for agroforestry, mostly working with our cacao. And we take people all the way through the journey of planting seedlings all the way to making chocolate, because we have every step of the process going on at the farm. We germinate seedlings. We cultivate the trees. Once the trees are planted, we take care of them. We prune them. We harvest. We dry and ferment our cacao on site. And then once it's dried and fermented, it's in form where it could easily be made into chocolate. So we take people all the way through that, kind of like the journey, the agroforestry cacao journey, all the way up to the chocolate. So that's super nice, really nice program. We've had a lot of really good people go through it. We've had visitors coming back now since January. We've been a little bit more busy with visitors. So yeah, people can check it out and see if they want to come down.
Well, I just think it's amazing that you are really walking your talk. So where do you see this going? Will you and Juan be there forever, or will you come back to the States, or will you?
No, I have no intention to go back to the United States. I think we'll be here for a pretty long time. I mean, if we move on to anything else, it would probably be to like another regeneration project. Maybe once this one is really like mature and going. I mean, but I think, we're pretty into this life now, and the only thing that we would ever change was maybe going on to regenerate another degraded lot, which is pretty much like what we do. Like I said, where people come and they buy land that's close to us, and then we help them to manage it. But we have big plans for what we're doing. We've got this little bit of cacao going, and we're selling roasted nibs. I export roasted nibs to the States, and we sell them. I would really like to expand that as a model for a business. All around us, there's cacao that is grown with a lot of herbicide. They don't use pesticides on cacao because they're not really bothered by pests, but people do use quite a lot of herbicide in the fields and fungicide. The big problem in the developing world with goods is that they're not processed in their country of origin. So farmers break their backs harvesting their bananas or the cacao, loading them onto trucks, and they literally get like $10 or $20. I'm not kidding. For like a great big truck full of cacao that's going to be turned into little 2-ounce chocolate bars that cost $9 each. They get like $20 for all that, like in its raw form.
Wow.
The infrastructure to process things in the developed world is really lacking. And the fact that we process our cacao up to nibs is really unique. And of course, it's because we have an advantage. We're coming from the developed world. We have facility with the internet, and we know about how to get things to like a market and open an online store. These barriers to entry are really, really high. I mean, they're like insurmountable for most subsistence level farmers in Ecuador or Colombia or Peru and Africa, et cetera. So what our goal is to do is to get this business large enough where we actually need to start buying cacao from our neighbors. And then when we have to buy cacao from our neighbors, we have the ability and the power to say, we can pay you a much better price than the local distributor, who's just one of many, many middlemen. We want organic, good quality cacao. We want you to...
So you're getting them to transform their land as well. Yeah.
We'll incentivize you to grow your cacao organically, to prune the trees by hand, et cetera. And we will pay you a price that will pay you for your efforts.
Nice.
and start an association, a local cooperativa of cacao growers growing their cacao organically and getting a better market price for it. Now that we have this business launched and it's going fairly well on the retail end, that's our next goal, is to make it bigger and to start, including people in the area, helping them to overcome these barriers to entry into the market, where it's like, look, don't worry, we'll sell it. We've got the online store, but we want good quality, well fermented, well dried cacao. We can even, get the cooperativa to help build dryers, like the manual infrastructure that's needed. It's not expensive. It's easy to do.
So what kind of time frame is that?
I'm thinking in the next year and a half.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, we're moving pretty fast. Every little bit of money that we bring into this place, like I desperately need a haircut. Like, we just don't spend money on anything. We just like everything that comes in, we use it to like pay our local employees to work. We put it right back into the project. We've got a super, super simplified way of living. Like if I need, we don't even buy clothes because people come and they visit us and like they leave clothes. We don't really buy anything anymore. The things that we don't get me wrong, we need some income because we don't grow everything that we eat. We do buy some food. We buy commercial things like coffee, sugar, cooking oil, things like that. We don't grow everything. We do need some income for ourselves, but like at this point, it's so low level that we really just, everything that we take in through donation, through Patreon, people signing up for courses. When I say it really goes back into the project, like I really mean it. You go out and spend $3 on a haircut is like a big deal. There.
$3? Oh
yeah,
my God. Oh my God. Would they wouldn't even cut my bangs for that.
I know. So.
You've given our listeners a lot to think about, because I think, we're all kind of at a point where how do we live more simply? How do we give back to the earth that has given us so much? So when you get to the point of overwhelm, how do you stay sane?
We just had a visitor here from London, a lovely woman named Sarah. She was here for 3 weeks doing cacao apprenticeship. It was really great for me to sit down with a woman my age and really get into what is this sense of hopelessness that people have about climate change, and this feeling that it's just this overwhelming thing and just blocking it out, to get to the root of that, because like I don't feel it anymore. I mean, and it's been a really long time since I had to feel that way. What we talked about was that when you're really doing something, even if it's on a small scale, but you're doing purposeful work, which, we also had this great guy staying with us who's studying neuroscience with a psychotherapy angle to it. And he said the same thing. He said, when people are engaged in purposeful work with a goal, their state of mental well-being is so much more improved than just talking about it or trying to talk it through or whatever. But having something, a purposeful work in your life, contributes to your sense of well-being and your sanity so much more. Talking with Sarah, I even asked her, I was like, well, what kind of podcasts, are there podcasts out there I could listen to? Because I don't get online very much and I like to listen to things that are worth my time. And a lot of the podcasts were out there, they were good, but it was so much theorizing. It was so much this, how can we recapture ourselves? How can we be more simple as people? How can we go back to this? And it's a lot of, well, okay, like go out there and do it. Plant something. Get in the soil, put your hands in it, see what it's like, hear the buzzing of the bees, see the bird fly overhead. Get yourself in a sensory experience. Get yourself into a really tactile, palpable, in the dirt sensory experience of what you can do to heal the earth, or however it is that you want to put it. Do it.
Love
and
it.
in the act of doing it, your sense of hopelessness begins to abate, and then you have more energy to do more. And that's really the best way I can put it, is to do something in nature. Don't stop talking about it.
I definitely hear you. I feel very close to the earth because of my garden. Definitely because of my garden. When I have my hands in the soil, well, I live close to the ocean. I walk in my bare feet. I have that physical connection with the earth. But I have to say that doing this podcast helps my well-being, because I feel like I'm talking to people and spreading the word about people that are doing things, and just talking about it on a soul level, just talking about what's going on and not burying our head in the sand.
Exactly. I mean that, and I've talked about that with Juan. Like, like at this point, we're at a level where we could be bush people. I mean, we could just go offline. You know what I mean? And and just we have fish, we have chickens, we have food. And
Now,
if
do you have electricity?
we have a few solar panels.
Okay.
But it's a recent installment.
And what about plumbing? Indoor plumbing?
We have running water. We have like a system where we harvest rainwater into tanks, and then we use gravity to bring it down into our kitchen, bathroom, and into our shower. We have composting toilets. We have like some, nice facilities, but we do compost our waste, and we have running water, but it's a system that we built ourselves.
But it's workable. It's rudimentary, but it's
workable. Yeah. But I say I don't want to do that. Like I don't want to be a bush person because I still want to share.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my sanity also comes from that other side of being out here talking with you and the podcast and being able to share.
That's kind of your purpose. You're there learning and sharing what you know and what you've learned to people that aren't quite as brave as you, but still want to make a difference, and can in their own backyard.
And can in their own backyards. They can also lots of community projects. There's community river cleanups. I know in Washington, D.C., they have several a year. There's lots of ways to get on board. Maybe not join so many forums, but actually find one or two of like-minded people that are orchestrating events in your area, and then it's things that you can go do. I mean, I know there was COVID. If you're out there cleaning up a riverbed and everybody's wearing a mask, and you're 10, 20 feet apart from each other.
Well, this year has been a good pause, I think, for a lot of people to slow down and kind of figure out really what matters. And I think there is this idea that simple, get more simple. How many pairs of shoes do you need to own? How often do you need to go buy new clothes? And here in the States, it's immediacy. And especially with Amazon in the past year, I think it's just been nuts.
Oh, it's just exploded. I actually I call them like my life hacks since I moved off grid. And simple things like if you're working on something, like if you're working on writing something or something creative, to put your phone on airplane mode. People don't even know that's something that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, just put it on plane mode so that you don't hear it beeping, so that you don't get distracted. Because when you're in a flow, when you're in a really good workflow and you get interrupted, sometimes that's it. It's over. Or it takes you like 10, 15 minutes just to get back into it.
To get back. Yeah.
So like using the technology that's at your hand, not abandoning it, not being like, oh, I'm not going to have a cell phone. That's evil. I'm going to throw it away. But just like put it on airplane mode a couple times a day. And I have a friend who was having a lot of trouble meeting deadlines. And I said, just put your phone on plane mode when you need to work on something. And then he told me, not only do I get my content written and do I get my deadlines met, but when I see that little airplane sliding into place, like my heartbeat slows down.
The difference is instead of letting technology assist us, we've let technology dominate us, own us. You can't be without your phone. So any good news in what you see going on for climate in the world?
I do a lot of research on agroforestry worldwide. It's like when I do have time to get online, mostly what I do is I download academic PDFs about agroforestry efforts worldwide, sponsored by universities and governments, and I read those. I was a historian. I mean, I studied history in school and economics, so I'm sort of like have that academic mind where I like to research. And there is a lot of movement towards agroforestry and also, like we talked about before, silvopasture, sustainable grazing. And it's big. It's not just like the little 10-acre plot level. I mean, there are governments getting on board. There are a lot of universities sponsoring studies. And it's a real movement. It's not something that's a tiny thing. It's a real movement. And that's the good news. The problem is that the forces that are working against it are bigger and have more money and have a lot to lose by what I would call the victory of more sustainable systems. So, for example, for some reason, seeds, pharmaceutical drugs, oil, and herbicides and pesticides are all the same people.
Well, yeah. Who decided that Monsanto should be like the biggest maker of herbicides should actually own all of our seeds too?
And now Monsanto is actually technically owned by Bayer, the biggest producer of.
Right.
So exactly. So this is just one example of how all these forces in bed together have a lot more money, resources, and power than the developing world governments or the universities or academia that is on the other side.
But getting back to what you said in the beginning, we have to realize that we are the system. When we decide that we are not going to purchase the things that they put out there and we're going to push back, then in order for them to profit, they have to change what their offerings are. The biggest hope that I have is that consumers actually realize that we hold the power.
That's right.
I'm an economist by training too. So supply and demand, baby.
So know that. Demand is the engine.
Yeah, demand is the engine. But as long as what you demand is a pair of new high heels, then that's what's going to be manufactured.
Yeah, or even to link it into what we're saying, if what you demand is a bottle of Miracle Grow fertilizer,
right,
made by Monsanto Bayer, stop demanding that stuff. Because if you're not going to have a lawn or a smaller lawn or a wildlife lawn or a pollinator attracting garden instead of a lawn, you don't need that bottle of Miracle Grow.
Right.
So it's one decision can inform another. It can be like a very concrete chain to follow to make that decision. I'm not going to buy Miracle Grow because I'm not going to have a lawn. And if I'm not going to have a lawn, it's because I'm going to grow my organic food all throughout my growing season. And then I'm going to eat that instead of going to the grocery store and buying this pesticide-laced junk. In the wintertime, I'm going to have my pickles and preserves, so I'm not going to buy pineapple in the winter. It's like now we have like a concrete chain. Like we've actually got it, something that you could follow, like a plan that you can set up,
It's mindfulness, though. It's awareness. It's shifting our consciousness.
Yeah. And like start with the one thing. Like if you want to make a big shift to growing your own food and making your own pickles and preserves, start with that bottle of Miracle Grow and just don't buy it. Yeah. And then all these other things that I've talked about, they come from that one conscious decision.
Yep.
So it starts with like one conscious decision. And it did for me too. I mean, it's not this huge thing. It's one decision. And then sticking to that one decision leads to a whole bunch of other behaviors based on that one decision that follow it. So yeah, like when I say just do something, I really mean that. I really mean just do one thing.
That would be the action step, is commit to making a change and take the action today. One step forward, and that will lead to the next one.
It leads to the next one. And it also, like I talked about before, like it leads to a certain amount of mental sanity. You're a lot less hopeless when you're in action doing something that like you really feel in your soul is good and right, and is also showing you things in nature, like if it's something like a little front yard garden or a plot of land or a community plot, is something showing you that you're making progress. My own outlook about climate change, I mean, it really has changed more in the last 2 years since the land that Juan and I have been working on has quote unquote popped. The ecosystem has reached a level of maturity where it's now becoming a real system. You don't have to be out there all the time trying to fiddle with it. It's beginning to regenerate by itself. Mm-hmm. And seeing that happen, it makes me so much more optimistic, and it makes me so much more energized, because now you're actually starting to be able to witness the effects. But if you never started with that initial commitment and that action plan, you don't get to the place that I'm in now.
We need to clone you by about 3 million.
I don't know, there's a lot of other issues going on here. You might want to do a little gene selection while you're at it.
Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom and the journey that you and Juan are on. Sounds fabulous. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and